Okay, everyone, welcome to this introduction to shadow work. I am your host, Chelsie Skowyra. If we have not met each other, I am a former mental health therapist, and I've now been working as a spiritual mentor since 2017. Been doing the shadow work specifically as well since 2017, but have been really guiding people through this healing work since 2012. So let's begin. Before we dive in, I want to make a couple of things really clear. Shadow work is not mental health therapy, and it is not intended to be a replacement or a substitute for it. If you are kind of questioning, do I need shadow work right now? Do I need therapy? The resources that I have here on the screen can kind of help you determine. So starting right at the top, we have 988, which is a suicide hotline number that you can text or call to talk to somebody if you are experiencing suicidal thoughts or urges. I want you to know that if that is where you are at, this is not the time for shadow work. This is the time for you to be held, to be nurtured, to just be supported. And so save this work for another time. The second resource on there is 211 that will connect you with your local United Way. So that way you can learn about food, shelter, or clothing resources should you need them. And then finally, we have the number for Blackline. It is really important to me that I acknowledge my privilege as a shadow work guide, being a white woman. There will be things that in parts of the shadows for different people that I absolutely will never be able to relate to. And I want you to know that there's somebody out there who gets it, who understands. And so there is that phone number there. If you feel like that would be a great resource for you to have, know that it exists and those people are there ready to talk to you. So let's go over the shadow work non-negotiables, because shadow work without these three things present is not shadow work. We're actually going to start down with the bottom point because I think it is the most important point here that I want to make. Consent. You have the right to end shadow work at any time, and you have the right to disregard any practice that's offered to you that doesn't feel safe. That includes this workshop here. If we're getting into it and you decide, wait, this isn't the work I need to be doing right now for my healing, this doesn't feel safe, this doesn't feel right for me, you can go ahead and leave. That is your right to change your mind, and it is your right to say what is right for your healing journey at this time. And then we have self-care. You have to be practicing self-care, meeting your basic needs if you're going to be doing shadow work. While I don't believe that this work always needs to be intense or filled with tears or despair, it does leave you feeling vulnerable sometimes, and it can be very emotional. And so to make sure that you are best prepared, you need to be getting good sleep, eating nourishing meals, and drinking water. That has to be your bare minimum for self-care as you're doing shadow work. And then finally, boundaries. Your shadow work is for you. You do not need to share that you're doing this work with the people who you know wouldn't get it or appreciate it. That is okay. Another point around boundaries that I'd love to make is that if you live in a home with other people and you're deciding that you really want to sit down with these questions and this work, let them know that you're going to need some alone time, and make sure that you're clear about how much time you actually need, and consider the fact that you should be taking care of yourself after shadow work as well. You should be providing yourself some after self-care. So here are some of those ways that you can be practicing self-care for shadow work. starting with the mind. This is my favorite self-care tool for shadow work, microdosing distraction. That looks like scrolling on TikTok, watching some TV, reading. TikTok has a feature where you can set a time limit and it will let you know, hey, you've been scrolling, you've reached your limit. Do you want to continue? You want to close the app? This is where we have personal responsibility, right? When that notification comes up, we can love ourselves enough to go ahead and X out. And I want you to really hear me saying that scrolling TikTok can be self-care. It is not a bad thing to need that time to just decompress and distract yourself for a little bit. So I personally have mine set at a half hour. So if I'm scrolling for longer than a half hour, my notification will pop up and I know, okay, I've gotten my microdose of distraction in. That feels good. I know for me personally, if I do more than that, it's going to be unhelpful to me. The next is body. So tending to our nervous system. Like I mentioned, this work can be pretty activating. And so one of my favorite tools to use is a vagus nerve reset. Okay, wanted to make sure that you guys could see me. So we're going to do one real quickly. Vagus nerve resets, they can be done very quickly, very easily, and they just feel like a big exhale for your nervous system. I don't have a lot of time tonight to go into polyvagal theory and all the science behind this tool, but if you want to learn more about it, going onto YouTube, searching polyvagal theory or vagus nerve resets, you'll start to find some really great stuff there. So the tool I want to teach to you guys tonight is very simple. What we're going to do is we are going to place our one hand on the head, bring your ear down to that shoulder, and you're going to send your eyes up to the opposite direction, and we're going to hold that gaze for about 30 to 45 seconds. When you're doing this on your own, you can wait until your body's cues. You may feel like you need to sigh or yawn or just kind of feeling that happen. So go ahead, place your hand on your head, bring your ear down to your shoulder, send your gaze up to the opposite side, and hold that gaze steady there. And this shouldn't be straining. If it is, be gentle with those eyes. And as always, listen to your body. And I will let you know when it is time to move on. Releasing that side. We're going to do the opposite side. Hand to head, ear to shoulder, eyes gazing up to the opposite direction, and holding this here for about 30 seconds. And release. Taking a few blinks, giving your shoulders a few shoulder rolls in each direction. And checking in. How did that feel? Do you notice a difference? Do you maybe want to hold it a little longer next time? With vagus nerve resets, less is more. This is a self-care tool that you can use at the end of your shadow work rituals or after a really bad day or when you're feeling triggered. And it's going to help get your body out of that fight or flight mode. And like I said, less is more. So you don't need to be doing it all the time to receive the benefits. Just once or twice a day can make a really big difference. And then finally, a little self-care for your soul when you're doing shadow work is spending time outside. Being outside can help us remember what really matters and can reconnect us with our truth and with just the light in the world. Okay, before we cover what shadow work is, let's talk about what it isn't. And when I'm sharing this process and these concepts of shadow work with you all, there's a very popular shadow work teacher, Carl Jung. And with all due respect to Carl Jung, I've never read a bit of their work. And so this process that I'm sharing with you all today, these myths, these um, concepts are from my personal practice. They are the shadow work practice that I created, combining my experience in graduate school and as a mental health therapist with my spiritual awakening and providing that healing and mentorship to others. This is the process that has come forward. So while these might not be myths to other people, they are here. And so the first shadow work myth is that it's dark magic. That's not what we're doing here. Nothing more or less to that. The second shadow work myth is that it's for everyone. I do not believe that shadow work is for everyone at any time. As I mentioned at the start of this class, if you are feeling suicidal, if you are feeling detached from your reality, these are not the times where shadow work is going to be the potent inner work for you to be doing. Those are the times for you to be getting the love and nurture, support, and outside help that you are worthy of. And it's just simply not for everyone. The third shadow work myth is that you have to recover repressed memories. Can this happen as you're doing shadow work? Yeah. Does it have to happen for it to be shadow work? Absolutely not. The brain has a job, and sometimes it represses those memories for a reason. And it is okay for you to trust your brain in doing what it needs to do. And you can trust that you can still experience full healing, which, even as I say that, I want you guys to know you don't do shadow work because you're broken, because you're not broken. There's nothing about you that needs to be fixed or even healed if you don't want to consider that. Shadow work gets to be a way of learning about yourself, exploring who you are, and loving all of those complexities rather than being overwhelmed by them. Okay, so if that's everything that shadow work isn't, what is it? I define shadow work as an art. To me, it is the art of witnessing, transmuting, and accepting the parts of ourselves that we've deemed to be either too much or not enough. Shadow work is giving your shadow the experience that it needs for healing. And I'll give some examples of what I mean by that in a moment. So it's important to remember that there are no good or bad parts. Each part of ourselves wants to protect us in the way that it knows how. And as I explained these parts to you, specifically these parts of the shadow, some of this is really inspired by internal family systems, which is a therapeutic theory. And okay, so let me explain the parts to you, and then I'll explain why it illuminates the importance of doing shadow work. So we have the shadow, which is the part that carries the wound that the ego then turns into a limiting belief. It's shadow is a part of ourselves that we've kept hidden, that we push down. The ego looks at the shadow, sees the wound that it's carrying, says, okay, I see that. I never want this person to experience that ever again. So I am going to create this belief, this fear, and do whatever I need to do to protect them. The ego is very reactive. And then we have the higher self. And that's the wise part that understands the bigger picture of all of this and can guide the inner work. So the reason why this illuminates the importance of shadow work is because when we're not doing the work, the shadow and the ego are still in communication with one another. The ego is still looking at that shadow and seeing what wounds are there. And there's an energetic communication that's happening. When we do shadow work, we invite the higher self in, and we get a moment for the higher self to say, oh, I see that wound that's being carried. Ego, it makes so much sense why you created that belief. Let's approach this differently, shall we? And then you get to do the work. And all of a sudden that wound is different. And if that wound is different, then the ego has nothing for it to base its fears and limiting beliefs on. And if it doesn't have anything to base its fears and limiting beliefs on, well, then we've created more space for our higher self and for our truth to be what is shining through, what is guiding our behaviors and beliefs. So let's talk about the process of shadow work. Shadow work happens in seasons, and just like all healing, it's cyclical. The intention of shadow work is not to conquer or to get rid of your shadow, but to be able to understand it and work with it. Like I mentioned before, your shadow work is giving your shadow what it needs for healing. For some people, this might look like the chance to just be soft and sob in a corner as somebody holds you and doesn't judge you for those emotions and doesn't try to make you like analyze anything in that moment or validate your emotions. For others, it might look like putting on the sexiest outfit they've ever worn and going to the grocery store and not being afraid of who they might run into as they're all dolled up, or even the opposite, wearing your comfiest, dirtiest sweats and just going there and not worrying. It's looking at that wound that you've created awareness around and giving it the experience that it needed to have in order to feel better. And so I have observed 6 different steps of shadow work: willingness, awareness, feeling, processing, understanding, and integration. And we'll go more into those in just a moment. As we go into those, something to keep in mind is that these are all of these things are happening at different layers, right? They're happening on a subconscious level, a conscious level, and then finally embodiment. So subconscious is what we were talking about earlier, why we're doing the work, because we know that there is something subconsciously happening. We know there is energetic communication happening with these different parts of the self. And so by choosing to sit down with a journal and fill out some prompts or reflect on a trigger that happened that day, we begin to bring things into the conscious realm. And for a lot of people, this is where shadow work stops, is this conscious part, the processing stage of shadow work. It says, okay, I know what's there now. That's it. But embodiment is crucial. Embodiment is when we look at what we've brought to the conscious, we've seen what needs to be done, and we actually do it. We don't just say, oh, I've got to stay that same person who I was. I experienced that pain and that trauma. Who would I be if I suddenly didn't relate to that in the same way? But shadow work is the opportunity to relate to that in a new way. It's not to invalidate the hardships that you've been through, but it's to celebrate everything that you are. So back to those steps. With each step, I'm going to give you an example of a different activity or tool that you could use to really explore that part a little more. So with willingness is the openness to do the work and to commit to yourself. So for our mind, this would look like having a non-judgmental perception. I know as I say that, it can be way easier said than done, but just try it. It doesn't have to be something that you stick with for everything and forever. But when you are sitting down to do shadow work, when you're about to engage in your shadow work ritual, saying to the self, this gets to just be. I don't have to judge a feeling or a thought or a behavior. I just get to observe it. That's all that's happening here. And we can cue our bodies into that by using open palms. So open palms, this is a skill from dialectical behavior therapy. I used to lead a teen group, and for the willingness skill, that we would teach open palms, and that's exactly as it sounds. I encourage, go ahead and try it. See the energy when you think about willingness and you place your palms up, just what that feels like. So often our bodies are just clenching so hard to keep everything within, stay strong, to keep that brave face on. But open palms is a willingness to be open and to be compassionate with yourself and to receive. And for our soul, using prayer, this gets to look like however you need it to look like, using whatever terminology you need to use. So an example of using prayer for willingness with shadow work is simply, guide me to being willing to understand myself. Guide me to non-judgment. I am willing to explore every part of me. Show me the way. Using that prayer to invite in your spirit team. Because especially if you're doing self-guided shadow work, what am I saying? Really, for all of it, inviting in your spirit team to your shadow work. Because there are some things that are just too much for the human mind to comprehend. And so rather than putting the pressure on yourself to figure it all out, inviting your spirit team into your shadow work and asking them to release anything that you don't need to bring to your awareness, to make their presence known so you feel their love and their support as you're doing this work. Because you may feel alone, but you are never alone. Your spirit team is always there with you to guide and support you. The next phase of shadow work is awareness. So we've been willing to go ahead and see what's there, and now we're seeing it. We are understanding that the shadow is a part of you, and you're being conscious of how it shows up in your life. One way of working with this phase is by taking an inventory of your triggers or fears. Noticing throughout the day when a limiting belief or fear comes up, and just opening up that notes app in your phone and jotting down what you felt and what happened. And you do this so that way when you are in a safe space to explore it more, you can begin to flush it out if you need to. And I give you some tools for that in just a couple steps. For our body, it is doing body scans, scanning our body for tension and providing gentle massage to those places where there's tension. So if you've never done a body scan meditation before, what it looks like is by just getting into that still and silent place and starting either at the top of your head or the tips of your toes and scanning your body for areas of tension. And the reason we're doing this is because our bodies can give us so many cues as to what is going on. it can say a lot about when you're feeling a fear and the tension's happening in your chest versus your lower back. And there are lots of spiritual interpretations for that. Look into Louise Hay if you're very curious about that. But even more so, I would love to encourage you to notice that tension and then ask your higher self, ask your spirit team what that tension means so you can interpret it for yourself. And then for the soul, it's doing meditations to connect with the shadow self. It's finding a guided meditation that will lead you to a space where you can have that like liminal conscious subconscious experience with the shadow. And again, if you have any questions at all, feel free to unmute yourself or send it in a message. And you have my email as well. If you feel more comfortable asking questions through email, you are all more than welcome to do that after this class. So the next phase is feeling. And this is a step that people really love to skip over. And I understand it. We're afraid that if we let ourselves feel those emotions, that we're going to feel them forever, that we're going to spiral. And that is not what I want for you at all. One of the pieces of feedback I always got as a training therapist when we used to do the like behind the two-way mirror thing, because that was legit. I would have a session with people and there would be a whole class of people behind the mirror, and one of my supervisors just observed that I struggled letting people leave feeling sad or feeling mad, that I always wanted to wrap the sessions up with a bow. And while I've gotten better with that, I still don't believe in leaving anybody dysregulated. And that's why I gave that vagus nerve tool at the start. So that way, if you get to this feeling phase and you are feeling spirally, pause, go to those self-care tools and come back when it is safe to. And this is also why I really encourage people to do this work with the support of somebody. So that way you have that outside person to depend on for holding that space as you're feeling the emotions. And that's why one of the tools that I share is by just openly sharing your story with safe people, or free writing, just grabbing that journal and writing whatever needs to come out. For our body, it looks like letting our body have that emotional reaction. We swallow our tears and our screams so much. And if you feel like you can't do that, right? Like you feel like you want to cry or you want to scream, notice I included laughing there as well, because sometimes there's part of the shadow that wants to feel more joy, that wants to feel happy, but we kind of have the Eeyore experience, right? I don't know how many of you remember the quote from Eeyore of like, I'm afraid to be happy. Why? Because when something bad happens. And so that's why I included laughing as a part of what the body may need for feeling. But if you feel like you can't get yourself there, force it. Force the scream. I get crying force is a little bit harder, but force a laugh, force a scream. It might just get the ball rolling. Another great thing to do that I connected with the soul is listen to music. Music can really help us to elicit those emotions to come forward so that way we can really fully feel them. I remember learning, I wish I could remember the study off the top of my head, but there was a study done and it was like looking at the brain and emotional reactivity. And most emotions lasted on average for like the longest 8 to 13 minutes. And so we can either avoid feeling the emotion for who knows how long, hours, days, months, years, or we can commit to 8 to 13 minutes and just feel it through. Once we've felt the feelings that need to come up with the awareness that we've gained, then we can begin to process what's going on. That's where we make meaning of our emotions, of our experiences and beliefs that have been brought to our awareness. So for our mind, this is where it's really great to use journal prompts. I actually will share with all of you an excerpt from my evening ritual journal where I share 6 processing steps. Let me go ahead and show it to you guys real quick. Okay, here we go. So you'll start with what fear or trigger came up for you today. You go, what was happening and how did you respond? After that, we look at what was the belief behind the fear or the trigger. What wound does that belief stem from? So we had more ego prompts. Now we're getting the shadow higher self prompts. What does that wound need for healing? And then if your angels or guides, most loving person you know could give you guidance, what would they say? And so those are some prompts that you could use at any time to do some shadow work, to be able to take a bad day, and rather than it just be a shitty bad day, you can process it and make meaning of it. For our body, this looks like shaking, like literally physically shaking. I love listening to Florence and the Machine or Taylor Swift, putting on those shake it out, shake it off songs and letting the body shake. I know it was like a viral thing too on TikTok sharing about how when you see a squirrel almost get hit by a car and you see them like shaking on the side of the road, that's their bodies decompressing. That's their bodies going ahead saying, holy shit, that was traumatic. We need to move this energy through. And they move the energy through. We as humans get so stiff in our bodies and so uncomfortable in them that we just want to cut them off from the emotional process fully. But we can't. That is part of the reason why sometimes you feel like, but I journaled about this. Why doesn't it feel better? Because your body still needs to have the experience of it feeling better. And shaking is one way to do that. And I mean, literally just physically standing up and shaking your body. And then for your soul energy work, letting your, whether that is receiving energy work or doing your own energy work, you do not have to be attuned to Reiki or another healing modality to be able to do energy work yourself. Remember those open palms? Imagining that there is white light pouring into those palms. And then imagine bringing that white light from those palms to your heart and sending that light through the body. And trusting in the energetic process that's happening. This is where the reason why I love including energy work in the processing stage is because processing feels so consciousness heavy, but energy work happens on such a subconscious level, but it's still a processing. Next, we have understanding. So we've felt the emotions, we've made meaning of them. Now we got to practice accountability and self-compassion as we embody the shifts that we're experiencing. For our mind, this might look like affirmations. I love using affirmations with shadow work because so often we can just be convinced that affirmations are something, what's the word for it? Like they're not really important. They don't really work. It's just a bunch of like bogus stuff. But with that awareness that you just cultivated in those beginning stages, you can begin to see what affirmations you actually need. Maybe you've been saying, I'm worthy, I'm worthy, I'm worthy to yourself every day, and being like, why does this feel like bullshit? When really the affirmation that your shadow needed to hear is that I accept myself. I'm learning how to be worthy. Using affirmations can help us to begin that embodiment phase. And for our body, to me, understanding can be expressed through dance. And not like a choreographed dance, just an ecstatic, free, move your body. Holy shit, you're actually in your body dance. And then for the soul, using tarot and oracle cards to deepen your understanding. It might look like using those processing prompts and pulling a card for each prompt, and then kind of gaining some understanding for yourself as to why you would get that. So we take this understanding, this accountability and self-compassion, and we begin to integrate it all. So integration, again, taking everything that you've learned about yourself and actually following through with the changes that you want to make. Now that you're aware of the wound that the shadow is holding and how your ego is expressing it, you're getting that guidance from your higher self on what it is that you could do with this. It's time to do it. For your mind, this might look like checking in with your beliefs and values. They may have changed now, and that may require you to make some shifts in how you present yourself and how you approach life. For our body, it looks like honoring our body's cues. It's noticing, because you've been doing the body scans, it's noticing, oh, that's some chest pain here. That's a cue that there's something happening in my shadow for me, versus, oh, my head feels like it's going to explode. For me, I know that that means my ego's in overdrive. And though each thing may need a different response. But through this shadow work that you're doing, you'll learn what those cues mean. And then finally, with the soul, rituals and creative projects. There's a reason why my shadow work program is set up as rituals. And for me, that's because that is giving your shadow the experience to have the actual healing experience, rather than just sitting and thinking about what it might feel like to be tapped into your dark divine feminine. We tap into that dark divine feminine in the ritual. And creative projects, to me, are one of the most beautiful ways of transmuting energy. It is saying, looking at that wound, right, and saying, okay, it's here. It doesn't need to live like this in my body the same way. It doesn't need to stay in my heart in this way. What could I do with this instead? I was going to hold myself back for a minute, but Taylor Swift is really such a great example of transmuting shadow work. Truly, she took a time of being ridiculed and bullied and basically like revenge porn type of situation stuff, had hundreds of thousands of people commenting on her social media with snakes, calling her a snake. And she took that and turned it into the Reputation era that was symbolized by snakes. And as somebody who grew up being bullied for a lisp and would have teenage boys, anytime I spoke up in class, be like hissing in the background, when I heard Taylor Swift give that hiss in the Anti-Hero song, so healing for my shadow self. Yes, because now, rather than that hissing sound triggering a reaction in my body of remembering those boys doing that and me feeling stupid and silly for speaking up. I have this example of it being like the hissing being a part of a Taylor Swift song. And I love that for myself. And so being able to transmute the energy into something different is one of the most beautiful integration tools you could do. So let's create a ritual. Like I said, to me, rituals are such a beautiful way of sitting with the shadow work process, of sitting with yourself, honoring yourself, and doing the work. Your shadow work ritual can be as simple or as extravagant as you need it to be. It can look like you opening up your notes app and writing some shit out, doing what you need to do. It can look like you finding a dark, flowy gown and putting on dark makeup and just creating a whole aesthetic. It gets to be whatever you want it to be. So first we have our opening, right? This is where we're setting our intentions, we're gathering our materials, and we're inviting in our spirit team to join us for the ritual. I love having like a themed ritual. Like I mentioned, the dark divine feminine, right? That's a theme of one of the rituals we do in the shadow searching group. And so for that ritual, I encourage people to dress however their dark divine feminine wants to dress. For some, that looked like long flowy black dresses. For others, it looked like their sweats. And that's beautiful. So kind of choosing a theme that you want to work with can also help you from experiencing that overwhelm of not knowing where you even want to begin with doing the work. Next, we have the core of the ritual, and that's the magic. That's giving your mind, body, and soul what it needs. That's listening to that wound and honoring it by giving it the healing experience that it desired. And then for closing, you make a plan to integrate and you practice some self-soothing self-care. For the magic part of your ritual, here are some suggestions that you could do. And again, this gets to be for you. Maybe your ritual, the magic part needs to start with some dance before you go into meditation, or maybe you need to meditate before you start going into a yin yoga. It gets to be what you want it to be. But all of these tools can help you create a really beautiful full ritual. For anybody who ends up joining the shadow searching group, I give lots of examples for different essential oils and crystals and creative projects that you could do in your shadow work ritual. But I wanted to be sure to at least give all of you the basic idea of things that you could include. And then bringing it all together. So I felt like the best way to bring it all together was to share a shadow work story of my own with all of you. And so before I dive in, I do want to offer an extra little tool, right? Because I want to give a trigger warning that I will be talking about suicide. And so if hearing this story isn't for you, you can go ahead and mute me, silence your thing, and wait until you see the slide change, or if you need to leave, or if you want to listen and hold space, that's beautiful as well. If you find yourself feeling activated as you're holding space, tapping that you could do is right along your collarbone. As you're listening, just tapping right here, just moving that energy through. Or also the karate chop point on your hand, or the space between your pinky knuckle and ring finger knuckle. Tapping right in there Using this can help you just stay regulated and keep the energy moving throughout. So, as I share this story, I want to just share it. I was going to kind of dissect it and show you how this part was about. Oops, sorry guys. How this part was about this phase, and this part is connected to this step in shadow work. But shadow work is a holistic practice. It all comes together. It really isn't just like a step by step by step thing. And so when the shadow work story that I feel called to share with you all today, when I was in one of my first peer supervision groups working at my first job as a mental health therapist, there was a loss. There was a client who ended their life. And I remember sitting in the supervision group, just feeling like really overwhelmed with the story. And obviously I'm an empathic person, so that part like made sense that I was having a reaction to it. But there was like this gnawing in my gut that I could not ignore. And so I went home and I sat with myself and I asked myself, what's going on here? What is this gnawing that is not leaving me after hearing this story that just happened? And I was reminded of being in the 8th grade and being at a football game. I was at the football game with my little then boyfriend, and one of our mutual friends came up to us and told us that he was going to end his life that night. He thanked us for being friends, promised us it was nothing we had done, just wanted to say goodbye and didn't want us to have any questions or feel guilty about it. And so he walks off, goes back to like band, and my boyfriend and I at the time are just like, what do we do? What do we do? I mean, we're kids, right? So we're kind of talking about what to do, and finally we realize we need to talk to an adult. So we go over to where everybody is, and this had maybe been like about 20 minutes had passed at this time. We ask where this guy is. Somebody says, oh, he had a headache, he went home. I go, fuck. So my parents weren't there at that time, but I lived close enough to the football stadium that I ran home. When I mean I ran. And I know most of you don't really know me, but I'm not really a runner. That's okay. I'm not really a runner, but I sprinted home, got home, told my parents what was going on, said, hey, this dude came up to us. He told us he was going to end his life. I'm scared. And we don't know, like they said he went home, we're scared. So we look up the phone book, the yellow pages, find the phone number, and I call, I say, hey, this is what he told us. I'm really scared. His grandma told me he's okay. He's upstairs asleep. Okay, great. So hang up the phone. I'm sitting there. I just am bawling, and I'm like, I have to call back because he's not okay. I don't think he's just asleep. And I called back and I shared how he had told us that his plan was to take the rest of his antidepressants. So I share that detail. The grandmother says, okay. And all of a sudden she goes, I'll call you back. Okay. So at this point, I'm just sitting with myself, wondering what to do, like praying that he's okay. And about an hour later, our doorbell rang. And it was his mom and brother with roses thanking me for saving his life, because when he had previously attempted, he had used other methods, and they did not think that he was going to attempt to overdose. And so by listening to my intuition, I was able to help save my friend's life. And now he's gone on and he's got a family and kids, and it's all really beautiful. And so as I remembered that, the feeling in my gut began to dissipate. And I all of a sudden realized why I was where I was. I realized why, even though I had gone to graduate school and my initial intention was to work with couples, I wanted to work with couples and be a marriage counselor specifically, why the universe made sure I ended up working with kids and teens again. And with that awareness, right, with that story sitting in my shadow, rather than it just being this story that had become something that I wanted to forget about, that felt scary, that felt I just didn't really know what to make of it, it began to become a story that highlighted my purpose. It is now fuel to show up, to continue doing the work that I'm doing, to say, okay, even though I know shadow work can be a heavy topic to talk about, Source is placing it on my heart for a reason. There are people who need to do this work. And Source, for some reason, has decided that I am one of the people to help guide it. And so I've been able to transmute that intense experience into an example of my purpose and trusting my intuition. And I've integrated that and embodied that by trusting my intuition, by showing up and offering this class for free. So that way there's nothing holding people back from learning about this. And so that is one of my shadow stories. And I thank you so much for holding that space and letting me share it. And I hope that it serves as an example as to why the work is important to do. Because those experiences that we've been through that at one point felt just painful and unnecessary can become something filled with meaning. And so I hope that it's clear at this point why shadow work has to go beyond the journal. You have to be following through with the things that you write about. Make the mindset shifts, choose different behaviors, and show up for yourself. If you would like to continue this work together, I am now enrolling for my next round of my shadow work group, Shadow Searching. Shadow Searching is 4 weeks of transformational shadow work rituals. We have a Meet the Shadow, the Dark Divine Feminine, Witnessing the Inner Child, and then an integration experience of honoring the shadow. Plus, I have 5 modules of mini shadow work classes. Like there's an astrology in shadow work, and internal family systems in shadow work. Lots of really great material in there to help you create a shadow work practice that truly works for you. And so, with all of that being said, I know that I've gone a little longer than I intended, but it's time for some Reiki. And so if you would love to stay on and receive a little distance Reiki, I would love to have you here. But if you have to go, I will absolutely honor that as well. And you can always re-listen to the Reiki healing at a time that works for you. So if you've never experienced a distance Reiki healing with me before, what will happen is I will turn off my video and begin to send Reiki. As I send Reiki, I open myself up to channel any messages that need to come through, offering kind of a guided visual experience as well. If visuals do not come naturally to you, do not stress about it. Act as if. Let your imagination be your intuition's bestie to create the experience that you want to have. So after I am done, I will return to the screen send you all on your way. If you are receiving the Reiki, I encourage you to drink some water afterwards and just take some time with your journal, perhaps to reflect. And so with that being said, I'm going to stop my video and we can begin Reiki. And feel free to get comfortable, letting your body rest and receive. Simply being open and willing is all you need to do. And if you haven't already, I invite you to gently close your eyes or soften your gaze, whichever feels safest to you, as I welcome our angels and guides of the highest truth and compassion to be present with us. In your mind's eye, welcoming in the image of a bench. Seeing this bench wherever you see it. Perhaps it's near a river, maybe on top of a mountain, in the middle of a field of wildflowers. Just let the bench come to your awareness. Feel yourself sitting on the bench, feeling the bench supporting you, feeling your feet connecting with the earth, knowing that this indeed is the perfect space for you to receive Reiki as we welcome in the loving energy. Sending Reiki through the crown chakra, the third eye, the throat, the heart, the solar plexus, the sacral, and the root. On the bench, we make sure that there's space for our shadow self to sit next to us. We welcome the shadow self to join. And as I welcome in the shadow self, notice any areas of your body that you just feel any energetic sensations. And if you don't feel any, that is totally fine. This just may be a cue as to where a lot of this shadow energy resides within. Okay, so this is so cool. So what is going to happen here is we are going to give the shadow the gift of a release, and then we are going to celebrate that release. And so we ask the shadow, what wound would like to receive healing today? And trusting whatever comes up for you. You see a golden shimmering light beginning to surround you and surround the shadow figure. This is Reiki offering its healing. Trust that it gets to be this simple. Trust that even if this wound feels 1% better, that 1% is so worth it. It's so important. Again, trusting whatever experience you are having as this Reiki healing is intended for all who are present and all who will listen. There's this collective healing happening. This question coming up that the shadow is always asking, will we ever be happy? Fully, truly happy. And our higher self comes in with that message of we sure damn well, as soon as we aren't attached to it, as soon as we aren't attached to what that happiness is supposed to look like. And so all of the shoulds of what happiness should feel, should look like, are being released from the shadow now, from your energy now. Clearing what you should believe from the crown. Clearing what you should be seeing from the third eye. Clearing how you should be expressing yourself from the throat. Clearing how you should love in the heart. Clearing what you should do in the solar plexus. Clearing how you should feel in the sacral. And then finally clearing who you should be in the root. Your energy is free from these shoulds. Your shadow no longer needs to use those shoulds as a rubric for happiness. There gets to be space to experience it. And so that is where the celebration comes in. And this is where we invite the shadow to be too much. We invite the shadow to have, and you, because it's all you, right? You see you and your shadow standing up, even standing on top of the bench, dancing. You're dancing, there's fireworks going off, there are shooting stars happening, there's music. It's just a celebration. A celebration of your willingness to understand yourself, of your willingness to let go, of your willingness to transmute, of your willingness to be with the shadow. Because that's all the shadow really wants. It wants to be seen. It wants to be witnessed. It doesn't want to feel like it's something that has to hide. And so nobody is dimming her light now. Nobody is telling them to quiet down. We ask for Reiki energy and your angels and guides to release resistance to celebration. You are worthy of being celebrated. All parts of you, your core, your higher self, your shadow, your ego. Beautiful. In your mind's eye, you see yourself and your shadow embraced. And if you want to, you can even give yourself an actual hug right now. As you feel that embrace happening, your shadow thanking you for not being afraid of it, thanking you for giving it the opportunity to come forward and let something go and to celebrate, even if just for a moment. For these moments will have ripple effects. Your spirit team, so proud of the work that you've done, of the person that you are. Shadow, ego, and all. We ask for Reiki energy to go and release any other energy that needs to be released. This rainbow beam of light comes in to seal in this beautiful work that we've done from the crown, third eye, throat, heart, solar plexus, sacral, and root. Offering Reiki to Mother Earth as an expression of gratitude for all that she does for us. Taking a final moment on the bench, expressing gratitude for our spirit team and for Reiki energy. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And with that, you may gently open your eyes, wiggle your fingers and toes, and fully bring yourself back to the space around you. And so I hope that that short and sweet Reiki was a nice little something for your shadow self. Know that you are worthy of doing this work, of understanding and appreciating all parts of you. Thank yourself for being here. Thank you. I thank you so much. I will be sending out the recording as well as the slides and the journal prompts out tomorrow. If you have any questions about shadow work or about joining my shadow searching group, feel free to reach out to me. You can respond right to the email that sent you reminders about this class. Thank you again, and take care.